So I'm videoing this from a little bit different angle. I was watching some of my old videos and I thought, I look fat. And so I Googled, how do you keep from looking like a fat piece of crap while filming a video? And it said, film it from high up. So what you can't see is there's like a chair and 3 boxes and the little cheap tripod that I bought at Walmart. So for my own vanity's sake, I am trying to look less fat. I guess diet and exercise could be part of that, but if this works, then we can forget about diet and exercise. I wanted to talk about movie theaters today. Movie theaters have been dying all across the country, and I'm not sure that I'm too sad about that. I, of course, have nostalgia for theaters. I was a projectionist back in high school, and I guess, well, projectionist is generous. There's a different guy who got all the film reels and spliced them together, and I just fed the film into the projector and ran it and whatever else. I did a little bit of splicing. There was one time when The Mummy Returns was out. I remember this red alarm went off. It was like a red bulb and an alarm went off because the film had gotten stuck in the gate, and because that bulb is so hot, it had burned through the film and set off an alarm. And so I got to take the two sides of film that were burned and trim them and then splice them together. And then I remember going back to watch that moment, and there was always a jump where a couple of frames were missing. And I thought that was fun. It was also the first time as a high schooler I had to go and address a whole room full of people who were upset about something. And luckily nobody threw anything or said anything, but you could tell they weren't happy. Uh, when we had the theater I worked in was it was called Checkers. Is that what it was called? It sounds weird now. I think it was called. It was a Cinema Six. It had 6 theaters, 2 big ones, and then 4 small ones down the hallway. And some of the best memories I have of high school are working in the theater. And I love the fact that when I got to do it, it was on actual 35 millimeter film, because now that's a novelty. Although there is the other side of that, that it's a lot easier to screw up the projection of 35 millimeter film than it is digital projection. So like when you go to the theaters today, yeah, you're not seeing a film print, but it's a lot harder for the high school students that work there to screw that up. When you're doing 35, I was obsessive about it, but you can change the focus, you can change the framing. There's like extra right at the top and bottom that you can kind of make a judgment call on where the actual framing's supposed to be. And I was always trying really hard to make sure that looked as good as possible. And then also, I don't know if you know this too, but when a film shows up, it shows up in reels, and they're about 20 minutes each. And what we did is we had these big, we called them platters. And we would take the other guy, the real projectionist, would take all the 20-minute 20-minute reels, and he would splice them together, make a giant circle, and we would run the whole thing through. The only thing is, when those splices would go through the camera, occasionally, not very often, they could knock it a little bit out of focus or out of frame. And some of the other high school assistant projectionists didn't care. They'd start the movie, done. But I had such a love for it and so interested in it that I would go through and I would wait for every 20 minutes for that splice to go through, and I would make sure it was still in frame and in focus afterwards. So again, if you don't have somebody who's super interested in it, 35 millimeter film can go out of focus, it can go out of frame, but digital, from what I understand, I never projected digital, it just plays. And so it's in frame and it's in focus. I have heard there is some issues with the lenses you put on that can mess it up. So it can still be screwed up, don't get me wrong, but I think it's easier to have a good experience projecting digital, whether the quality is the same or not, and that's a big argument. But I think at their best, movie theaters can be one of our last shared social experiences. And at their worst, they can be one of our last shared social experiences. I was just going to go through on this video and talk about some of my experiences. I won't go too much more into my experiences as a projectionist because I kind of wanted to do a whole video about that. But where my love of theaters comes from is from going to see movies, of course, when I was younger, but also working in a theater. But we'll do a whole video about that. Anyway, this is supposed to be about my most memorable theater going experiences. And I think for like most of us, that goes back to childhood. So I remember my mom pulling me out of school. I don't remember if it was early. It feels like it was early, and we went to see the Jetsons movie. And this was such a rare thing. Like we went to the movies, but it was never like spontaneous like this. And I remember in the town I grew up in, there was the Cinema Six I worked at later on, and then there was the cheap theater across town that had two screens. And it was we called it the dollar theater because it was second run. It was stuff that had already played. And we went to see the Jetsons movie there, and we didn't have a lot of money, and we weren't usually spontaneous. So that's why I think that stuck out in my mind as a unique and memorable thing. Also, later on in life, I moved to the Washington D.C. area, and I had some really awesome experiences seeing movies there. And this was more when theaters had started to wind down and go digital. So there's a place, it's one of the Smithsonian campuses. It's called the Udvar Hazy Center. It's in Virginia. And they have a full-size reel, at least they used to, full-size reel projects film IMAX theater there. And of course, during the day, they show educational stuff and, Mission to the Moon and all the stuff that Smithsonian does. But at night, they would show actual Hollywood films. And at this point, the most memorable one I ever went to was Mission Impossible 4, which is Ghost Protocol. And that's the one where Tom Cruise hangs off the tallest building in the world, whose name is escaping me at the moment. It's in the UAE. Anyway, and he hangs off and it's for real, and they filmed that whole scene with IMAX cameras. And so we're in this, if you've ever seen an IMAX, if you've been to an IMAX, it had this, the screen was the size of a building, and the seats are at a really steep angle. And so once the film is projecting, it's such high resolution, and it's so big, and there's nobody in front of you. So like when you're in regular theater, there's maybe some people in front of you, whatever. No one's in your field of view except for the screen. And so there was this moment where Tom Cruise steps to the window they've taken out, and most of the film is shot in like widescreen 239, but then when it would go to IMAX, it would expand the picture. And this is what happens. He steps up to the edge of the window and it expands, right? And then all of a sudden you're hanging outside this building and you're, hundreds of stories up or whatever it is. I think it was 130. And it's real. And you could feel, I went to see it several times because it was such an amazing experience. You could feel everybody in the theater lean back like they didn't want to go out the window. It was such a visceral experience. The movie itself is really good, and I love all the Mission Impossibles to some degree or another. But I've never had that visceral reaction to like, oh, I'm going to fall, that came from that experience. Not all IMAX filmed movies are created equal, and we did get the chance to see The Dark Knight Rises. When The Dark Knight came out, I didn't live out there, but when the third film, Dark Knight Rises, came out, I remember being in awe of the images that were filmed in IMAX. They're really high resolution. They looked great, but the story itself kind of left me cold, and I learned then that it wasn't just the format that made the experience interesting. It had to do with the story and characters and how invested I was. And I don't hate The Dark Knight Rises, but it was nothing compared to the experience it seemed like everybody had with Mission Impossible. So I wish I was close to an IMAX now. There's not anyone around here at all. Another experience is a little bit different. I went to the AFI Silver Theater in Maryland when I lived out there, and they were showing 2001: A Space Odyssey in 70 millimeter. And I don't know how old the print was, but it did have scratches and pops and dust and whatever else. But it was still a really fun experience to sit in. That was not state of the art. I mean, it was the AFI Silver Theater. It was restored at the time, but I think it was built back in the 20s. And so it felt really, that was almost, it's different, but it was almost cooler to be in such an old theater that felt like time travel. You were going back in time, you were watching a movie in amazing quality still, but it was very obviously film that had been aged. And the neat thing about 2001: A Space Odyssey, if you've seen it, is there's whole sections of the film that are silent except for the astronaut breathing in his helmet. And that was really interesting. Everybody in the theater, because the crowd it attracted, it was a very respectful audience. And so people were very, very quiet most of the time, but when it really like got quiet on screen, you felt everybody hushed down. I mean, there's no babies crying in this one or whatever else. And so the movie was very, very transported. We were all super into it. And again, at its best, you feed off the energy of the people around you. And so that whole theater was so into it and so respectful, it amped up how good that movie was. I took my younger brother to see it. He's about 10 years younger than me. And he had never seen the movie. And so he didn't know what was going to happen. So we got drinks and snacks and whatever else. And I remember even when it was super quiet, he would be like chewing on ice because it'd be loud and you couldn't hear it. All of a sudden it would get super quiet and he'd have a mouthful of ice. And he was like trying to get rid of it as quietly as humanly possible. Uh, it's just funny to see, you know, when a movie isn't just loud the entire time and people are trying to be respectful, it was funny. Let's see what else. There was. Oh yeah. I noticed me and my friend Brian. We went to go see when the second Blade Runner movie came out, Blade Runner 2049. There was in Pocatello, Idaho. There was a theater that showed the original Blade Runner one night, and then it showed the new movie on its premiere that Friday or Thursday or whatever it was. Um, when we saw the original Blade Runner, which I'm a huge fan of, and the first video I did for the channel was about that being my one of my absolute favorite movies. I saw that digitally projected, and it was the final cut, the 4K restoration of it. And I got to tell you, I would love to see it on film. Don't get me wrong. I have, I know about film. I have nostalgia for it. But the absolute clarity and the fidelity of the image was phenomenal. And I loved seeing that. Was again an enveloping experience. Nobody in that theater was there to be disrespectful, although there was only like 5 of us. Which again, that can be nice when you've got the place to yourself, but at the same time, you're not getting that shared experience near as much. And then the interesting thing is, we went to see the new film Blade Runner 2049 the next night, and the sound was so high up it vibrated the screen like constantly, and so the picture looked like it was out of focus all the time. And again, I don't know how you would test that or prevent that or what was going on there, but one little thing, it almost ruined the movie for me because it was constantly out of focus. And that's very, very distracting. Anyway, I was trying to think of also some really bad theater experiences. I remember from in the early 2000s, I didn't watch any movies for a couple of years because I was off doing a 2-year mission thing. And when I got back from not having watched TV, not having watched movies for 2 years, we went and saw Revenge of the Sith with some friends. And I remember I was so overstimulated by the images and the sound. I almost got dizzy and overwhelmed, and it was really, really unpleasant. Add to that, next to us was a guy who was insanely drunk and kept threatening us and kept asking what had happened. So he was like our buddy 1 minute, and then he hated us the next minute, so that didn't help either. So I went to see that movie again later on, and I actually really liked that movie, but it was a negative experience. And then I took a trip with that same friend, Brian, that I went to see Blade Runner with. We went to Los Angeles, and part of it was to see the Guillermo del Toro exhibit at the Los Angeles Museum, but also we went to Quentin Tarantino's movie theater, the New Beverly, which is this single screen, very small, they only show film theater. And the first night we got there at midnight, there was a showing of Alien. And I remember that being a lot of fun because, again, nice crowd. They would get up and introduce the film and talk about it beforehand. I really appreciated that. And then also we went to go see another film called Conqueror Worm. And it's more well known by its title, Witchfinder General. And it is a movie about Vincent Price plays a guy who hangs witches and he's evil and they have to defeat him. Doesn't matter. But the print we saw was like an American print where it had the name Conqueror Worm. And again, very faded, very scratched up. And that was a wonderful experience. I'd never seen the film, never heard of the film. Now it's one of my favorite Vincent Price movies. But that was a great way to be introduced to it in a theater from the era. on film. There is something to be said for that. It's more like time travel than anything else. When you get to, you're in the dark, you can't see anything except for what's being presented, and yeah, I love that experience. The New Beverly was a neat thing to get to go see, and it wasn't super expensive. Um, so that was another really fun experience that I had in a movie theater. Anyway, I kind of threw some thoughts down about those things. Um, I don't mind seeing things in a multiplex, but it has kind of lost some of the magic. And with home video and getting so good, sometimes it's tempting to not risk being behind a bunch of teenagers or old people that don't know how to turn the brightness down on their phone. Uh, anyway, I don't mean this to be hating on films, but I think it's important to realize why they're having issues. And the blame goes around to lack of money, and so lack of people caring about projection, and then also bad behavior. But I still honestly believe that there can be really good experiences in the theater. I do want to see in our regular movie theater here in town, going to see Oppenheimer was a really, really good experience. And so it still can happen, it just feels more rare. And I'm a little sad about that, but it's hard to be sad when you can have an amazing library of films in incredible quality and watch it at home. So I guess my goal, what I would encourage people to do, is of course go to the theater if if you feel like it, but if not, make film at home a social experience. Invite friends and neighbors over, and you can show off your setup, and also introduce them to new things and have a little taste of that experience. Joel, my good friend, the only one who watches these videos, hey Joel, and I used to, every week when he lived here in town, he doesn't live here anymore, we used to go to his apartment and we would trade off watching movies. And just having one other person, sometimes that's enough of interaction to make a movie more important, to make it, somebody you can talk to about it and whatever else. Those are wonderful experiences. So yeah, even have one person over. But if you have a crowd, that can be fun too. Everybody has different opinions. Movies can be enjoyed a lot on their own. I do that a ton. But there is something elevating about a group of you going to see a movie. And then I love when people disagree about the movie afterwards. I love the number one negative thing that can happen is if everybody goes, eh. I love when some people hate it, some people love it, and they really get into it afterwards in the lobby or out in the parking lot. Those are some of my favorite experiences with movies. So yeah, let's make movies social again. And I'll do a different video about my experiences working in a movie theater and how much fun that was. And I just want to do something a little bit different today. And I'll see you on the next video.